this is driven off the Treasury ideology, right? Because effectively they are independent of the two sides of politics. So never mind who gets in. This Treasury mantra that you discussed earlier on, which is pull the lever, pull the lever, pull the lever, right? Irrespective of the consequences, is actually where the root cause of the problem lies.
Yeah, and just on that, there's one of the reasons for that is the Treasury cares about the federal budget, right? So I've talked about this previously. We've got this vertical fiscal imbalance in Australia where basically 80% of the tax revenues are raised by the federal government, and the states and local governments take the rest. And what this means, the problem with it is that the federal government collects all the income tax and they collect all the company tax, and for them, immigration is fantastic. It's great for the federal budget. We saw it in the last federal budget. So, the reason why it's great is obviously you bring in a whole bunch of people. They obviously, most of them work, so they pay income tax, and you end up with a whole bunch of extra income tax receipts through population growth. As well, they boost company profits, so you get more corporate tax receipts. So for the federal budget, it's great. Problem is the cost of population growth, whether it's infrastructure, social housing, services, so nurses, doctors, and all that sort of stuff. That's pretty much all funded by the state governments. So the state governments are the primarily responsible for service delivery and infrastructure. They cop it in the neck in this high immigration because they don't get much of the revenue gains. They get a little bit through obviously stamp duty, etc., because it props up the property prices. But the lion's share of the income tax, the tax revenue goes to the federal government, but most of the costs go to the state government. So you got this kind of problem with incentives there, and that's one of the reasons why Victoria and New South Wales in particular are absolutely drowning in debt right now, because they've tried to, the last sort of 10 years they've basically flogged off everything they can that's not bolted down, and they privatise everything to try and get some quick money in the door. They've also invested in all these hideously expensive infrastructure projects, which when you grow so quickly in cities like Sydney and Melbourne that are already built out, you've effectively have to retrofit your infrastructure. And that's incredibly expensive. So if you want to build a new road, because there's no more land available, you've got to basically do a tunnel. Tunnels cost, up to $1 million a kilometre. $1 billion a kilometre. And, in some cases. So your infrastructure is hideously expensive. And the way they've tried to get around it is all these public-private partnerships. So, you've got all these corporations like Transurban now fleecing us. I've said this last time, you try and drive around Sydney now, you get stung with a toll road anywhere you go because it's just toll roads everywhere. So one of the problems is Treasury doesn't account for those costs because the costs don't fall on its ledger, but it gets all the gains through the extra tax revenue. So it's another reason why it always supports this big Australia stuff. It also allows the government to claim that the economy is not in recession when it really is in recession. That's the point of these charts here. The national accounts were released 2 weeks ago, and they showed that Australia's real GDP per capita fell for 2 consecutive quarters. So we're basically in a per capita recession. And what that basically means is the overall economic pie is growing slowly. So we got, I think, 0.4% GDP growth in the June quarter, but because the population grew by 0.7% through this huge immigration, the pie is growing, but everyone's share of the pie is actually shrinking. And it's shrunk for 2 consecutive quarters. And you'll see in that chart on the left, we've had heaps of per capita recessions or, negative quarters of per capita GDP over the past, even during Australia's miracle, where we went 17 years or whatever it was without a recession, we actually did have them. It's just that they were papered over by this huge population growth in Australia.